Why do you fly drones in the first place? It's either to make money, save money, or reduce hazard hours.
And welcome to the first episode of the Unmanned Podcast, powered by USI, where we explore the world of unmanned aircraft systems, drone technology, workforce development, and the careers of tomorrow. I'm your host, Matt Hernandez, a retired Black Hawk pilot and aviation safety professional. Over the next 12 episodes, we will bring you insights on USI's credentialing pathways, pilot and technician training, and a wide range of industry trends. USI is proud to be an ASTM authorized training partner supporting UAS professionals in construction, public safety, energy, and beyond. Our very first guest is Josh Olds, the president, CEO, and co-founder of the Unmanned Safety Institute, and he's also my boss. He leads efforts to integrate aviation safety principles into drone operations. With a background as a commercial-rated pilot, A&P mechanic, and extensive unmanned experience, he has helped USI become a global leader in UAS workforce development. During this episode, we discuss the importance of training standardization, safety in aviation, and the emergent regulatory environment around the drone industry. We are very excited to kick this off, so let's go. Okay, folks, let's jump into this. Josh, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. How are you,
Good.
Matt?
I'm doing great. Can you give us a little bit of background? How long has USI been at it?
USI is entering into its 11th year of business. We founded the company in 2014.
Awesome. And what is the most exciting thing that you've done at USI while you started building it up?
You know what? I'm a fanatic for aviation. And so I think one of the coolest things that USI has done to date is just the introduction, and not to get all slap happy, but the introduction of students that would have had no opportunity to join aviation. They're joining aviation, aerospace careers through emerging technology, through drone technology, a low barrier to entry into the Federal Aviation Administration and aerospace careers. So that's the coolest thing that we've done from a workforce development perspective.
So USI plays a pretty important role in that workforce development within the industry. And why do you think that's crucial for both current and future professionals to have this type of access to workforce development?
Training is it's not just check the box training. It's really important to align the skill sets and the competency expectations of industry to the workforce development that's being done in the educational centers. And so USI's real core focus is making sure that when somebody goes through USI trainings, they're being validated through third-party proctored certification. So the training we do is about preparing a student to pass proctored certification for the competencies and the skill sets they need to transition into the industry. And so the real connection point there is industry need, both from a skill set competency perspective, and this is flying, this is fixing, this is being a visual observer, and the workforce needs or the development needs that have to happen at the workforce development level.
We're talking about the aviator that wants to break into the industry, or at least hone their skills and become even more developed in their abilities. But do we engage non-aviators as well? And if how is that approached at USI?
Yeah, it's really interesting when you look at remotely piloted technology or drone flying in general. The common phrase we get is they practically fly themselves, and I think for a lot of these technologies that are becoming highly autonomously, that is a true statement. The challenge is the process and the procedure behind deploying this technology in a repeatable and scalable way. And that's where the difference training, I would call it, the delta between being an aviator, being a pilot, and then transitioning into the remote pilot space. There's a very big delta in terms of what you need to know and what you need to understand and the processes and the way crew resource management looks and the way human factors work inside of the remotely piloted industry. That is very different between being an aviator and being a drone pilot or a drone technician. And so the delta there is really that big change or that standard that we're trying to support the industry with to make sure that, look, they're a pilot in command of the technology. Just like if you're in a traditional aircraft and you're flying through the national airspace, you're on the ground flying an aircraft through the national airspace. We want them to have that same mentality of pilot in command and responsibility for that asset as it's transversing across the national airspace.
That's interesting. And I'm sure our audience would like to know, like, is there anything special or specific that they need to know or a skill set that they need to have in order to take that next step, whether it be partnering with USI or even going on their own to develop, skills in using drone technology?
One of the probably most common conversations we have right now with individuals in the industry, and again, this would be for the individual that's looking to be a drone pilot or enter the industry from a commercial perspective, is that Part 107 is the legal requirement to fly. You got to have your FAA, Federal Aviation Regulation Part 107, that remote pilot certification, and that's a test that you have to take at an FAA testing center. From an industry or corporate perspective, it's all about risk mitigation. And so in a lot of ways, it's like passing a driver's test, but you haven't actually gone out and flew. And so one of the biggest pieces of advice we can provide from a workforce development perspective is you got to get skill-based training. Experience is key to corporate work because you have to be able to demonstrate your ability to mitigate and manage risk in the field, meaning that you've got to be able to prove that you've got hours on systems, you know how to fly, you understand how to use the sensor, but more than that, you know how to document that process. You know how to conduct a risk assessment. You know how to conduct a mission briefing. There's a whole ecosystem around operating and maintaining aircraft in the traditional aviation space. The remote pilot world is very much focused on Part 107, which is that knowledge-based, here's how you fly it legally for hire. But getting into this industry is a lot more than that. There's a much broader ecosystem. And because this technology is applying to every kind of industry cluster, being able to professionally and safely deploy this technology in the national airspace takes the next step after Part 107 of getting skill-based training, aligning to international standards, and being relevant inside of the marketplace at that high skill, high wage career level.
Yeah, it's kind of like that 107. I guess some people talk about it being like almost your learner's permit. You're able to start doing certain things that are beyond just the hobby level of drone activity, but really you to become a professional aviator, even in drone technology, you need to take that next step of education and skill set development. It's interesting. Well, what initiatives does USI have right now to ensure that there is this range of skill sets being developed throughout the workforce?
Well, first of all, I mean, a huge accolade to folks that get through Part 107 in the first place. I mean, it is the legal requirement to fly in the national airspace. Like that is a great first step. And again, a lot of individuals, a lot of companies don't quite understand yet that there's a trust certificate that's for the hobbyist recreational. And then there's the Part 107 for that commercial flyer. What USI did, and again, this was early days of the company, 2015, 2016, USI created a safety-based certification track. The certification track was about the competencies and the skill sets necessary to deploy this technology at scale, safely and professionally, which meant it addressed things like a mission briefing. How do you conduct a mission briefing and what's included in that? A risk assessment. What are you looking for when you go out into a location and you're conducting an aircraft operation there for the first time? What does that risk assessment look like? A site survey. What are you analyzing from a hazard perspective, both personnel domain, operational domain, the weather, environmental domain? What are you looking for when you get to a site for the first time? So what USI did was we created industry certifications that aligned to workforce credentials, to competency requirements, that whether you were operating in the electric utility industry or in the agricultural market or in public safety market, you understood the skill sets of what was required as a professional aviator to deploy that technology in the national airspace.
You're kind of touching on a little bit about the excitement of the industry as a whole, where a lot of the flash and the media is around the delivery segment. I think you would agree that it's just a small segment of the broader drone technology industry, but really you're talking about safety a lot and in the importance of having training that encourages safe operations. How about emerging technologies like AI or advanced navigation systems? How are those enhancing safety, and what does USI do with those newer technologies that are kind of on the front lines, if you would?
So it's really important from an industry perspective, and you mentioned package delivery, but autonomous operations are every big OEM, every major manufacturer, and they're talking about how AI is helping process the data, right? Because this industry is all about finding that return on investment. Like, why do you fly drones in the first place? It's either to make money, save money, or reduce hazard hours. Those are the three main uses that drive that ROI discussion. And so when you talk about how do we leverage AI, how does USI look at AI and automation? Again, pilot skill sets are evolving. If we look at traditional pilot skill sets today, seat of your pants flying, and then we look at how this looks in the emerging tech industry, it's evolving to a point where the psychomotor skills of flying an aircraft, those are becoming less and less important as aircraft get more automated. But what's becoming important from a human capital perspective is the ability to leverage automation management. Your ability to look at a screen with multiple aircraft on the screen, and you are identifying issues before they become emergencies or abnormal situations. And so that's the human machine interface, right? But the other aspect of that is the ability of the pilot to manage fatigue. You sit in front of a control station and you're able to not get tired of staring at a screen because you're managing so many different aircraft. So the skill sets from an aviator's perspective are evolving. USI sitting at the front end of that to ensure that the pilot competencies are here for both today's operations, but also those operations that are coming 1, 2, 3, 4 years down the line.
I think you hit an important kind of a theme here, and that's where it's monitoring the operations is still an important and safety function of that operation. And even in the manned aviation world, they're becoming more and more automated as well in those big rig aircraft, if you would. And I would argue that maybe it is even more burdensome when you have 20 aircraft that you're responsible on one screen as opposed to just one aircraft that you're flying. Obviously a lot of folks on board, but it just shows that there is some crossover here between the complexities of these different systems. Moving from that and talking about how those two complex systems, manned and unmanned, share airspace together, there's an evolving regulations and regulatory environment in airspace management and things of this nature. So how is USI preparing both the workforce and itself to meet those challenges proactively with the regulatory environment?
The FAA, again, came out a long time ago and said, look, we're not focused on airman certification standards, meaning those are how a pilot becomes commercially able to go fly. So right now, the only airman certification standard is Part 107. What USI did is we started looking at international standards. We started aligning coursework, content, organizational policy around standards that existed in the industry and were already recognized by the FAA through different traditional aviation operations that were going on. And so USI established itself as an ASTM authorized training provider. What this means is that the coursework has been approved and is aligned to standards for UAS personnel, for maintenance technicians in the Class 1 setting. In other words, these trainings that individuals are going through on the workforce side are aligning to international standard, and then they're being validated through third-party certification. And that's the certification aspect of validating workforce competencies. We're also participating with Commercial Drone Alliance as USI. This is to help get out in front of the needs of the industry. This is for, I would call it the leading edge or almost the bleeding edge of the wing from an aircraft perspective, but it's the front edge of industry that says, look, this is what a safe, professional operation looks like that is identifying the return on investment. And that's from an organizational perspective, a technology, hardware, and software perspective, and a personnel workforce standard. Who are we hiring to do this particular operation? So USI is really, again, using lessons learned from aviation, pulling history pages out of the books and saying, look, the aviation industry went through very, very similar aspects of what the drone industry is going through today. The difference is that the drone industry is flipping through those pages at a much more rapid rate than the aviation industry ever did. Again, 120 years of aviation. The drone industry is now 10 years into commercial UAS operations, but this technology is 50, 60 years old in some cases. It's been around a very long time. So the technology is there. Now we're talking about the regulatory needs to expand.
Yeah, that's an interesting that you kind of paint that picture of how long the aviation industry has had to develop, but then how compressed the new drone technology development cycle is. Let's expand on that a little bit, because we always hear about how safety and regulation and training requirements and standards kind of hold or restrict the evolution of these drone technologies. What's USI's position on that, and how do we approach those types of thoughts?
In the early days of USI, one of the sayings that we used to have is, look, we're very much an aviation company, but if you look at the cultures that are coming into this industry today, you have aviation, you have Department of Defense, you have hobbyist recreational, you have technology companies. All of these cultures, you could say, are coming into this industry in different forms and facets. And the reality is you need the safety, you need the process and the procedure of aviation to make sure that you're creating a footprint, a foundation for long-term operational success. But you also need the technology, hobby, recreational innovation. You need the ability to innovate and come up with new ideas and new ways of doing things. And so it is a happy marriage between aviation and technology that makes this industry a success, but it's a happy marriage between the two. You can't go so fast that you're having incidents and accidents, because that hurts long-term viability of the business model. At the same vein, you can't be so procedural and process heavy that you're stifling out innovation. And so you got to have a happy marriage between those two, and that drives industry success. We talk about safety at USI, and again, a lot of folks in the industry may get tired of us talking about safety, because again, it's something we put front and center, because what we believe wholeheartedly, and again, we're looking at what has made aviation successful, looking at that 120 years of aviation. It is the safety, the process, and procedure that allows for long-term repeatable operations. We want to make companies successful from day one, instead of having an incident or having an accident that they're having to respond from to then push the reset button. We want to make them successful from day one, so that as they move forward, they're finding that ROI, from that day one foundational setting.
And that makes sense. And talking about looking forward, moving on into kind of those future trends and what to expect, what do you see as the most critical needs of the drone and the unmanned systems industry over the next 5 years or decade? And what do you think about the workforce and the needs of the workforce over that same horizon?
So starting with the needs of the industry, we need an integrated airspace, meaning that we need both traditional aircraft and remotely piloted emerging technology operating in the same national airspace. Right now, we see a very segregated airspace where we're trying to separate technologies from operating near each other. We need an infrastructure to be able to integrate aircraft into the same national airspace. What does this mean from a workforce perspective? It means that we are training and educating individuals to leverage high levels of technology. This could be automation management. This could be monitoring user interfaces, the human-machine interface or interaction. It's training individuals, and I think sometimes my parents still think I play video games for a living when I start to talk to them about drones, right? So
we still play video games, and it might not be for a living.
That's fair. That's fair. So when you look at that aspect though of video games, what are video games? You're learning a user interface, and then you're managing that user interface as part of that operation. Not saying that we're gamifying the ecosystem of national airspace, but the skill sets that are going to be needed for this space are being able to manage and understand complex user interfaces, where we're able to manage a lot of aircraft. We're able to manage the data, command and control data links, all the different aspects of operations. And right now we're talking about specifically operations. And then you go into all of that infrastructure that's now in the field. That has to be aviation grade, meaning that it has to be incredibly reliable, incredibly durable, and built for the long term. And so that requires technicians that need to be trained, that understand avionics, that understand the technological pieces of infrastructure required for the safety of the national airspace. So from a workforce perspective, the knowledge and the competencies of our future workforce, and I'm talking within 5 years, is going to require a very tech-heavy digital circuitry design, avionics grade talent that are out there being able to fix, repair, return to service both the technology flying in the national airspace and the ground infrastructure that could be necessary for that operation. And this all plays into the modernization of the air traffic control infrastructure. That's a very hot topic right now. I think it's really important that we're looking at, look, you can build all the infrastructure in the world, but if we don't have a commercialized ecosystem from which that's going to operate and be maintained and carried into the future, we're looking 3 steps in front of ourselves instead of that long-term vision for repeatable, sustainable, scalable commercial operation.
I think you're hitting a good point there. And some of the issues, though, are the regulation isn't there. The roadmap's not really well defined yet. There's some components that are visible, but, we don't have the entire the directions to get from A to B. And I think that's going to be, what do they say, gasoline on the fire once we have those things in place to help guide the industry as a whole. So we've talked a lot about USI and the thoughts as the company and the airspace and the drone technology and safety and things of this nature. But let's move to a little bit about Josh and kind of what you're about. So what would you give advice to future aviators? What would you say to some aspiring professionals, maybe those that don't even have a background in aviation? What's your advice for those folks out there watching?
I think my number one advice is get the skill sets, the competencies, and the industry certifications you need to gain employment in a field that interests you, meaning that aerospace is a field, but the way emerging technology is rolling out is it applies to every industry cluster. So do what you love. First and foremost, you got to like what you're doing. And that may mean you're going into agriculture. That may mean you're going into criminal justice. You may be going into the electrical lineman industry. At the end of the day, you want to be diversified. You want to make sure you have skill sets that don't just align to the industry you're going into, but gives you the skill sets for the future of that industry. You want to prepare yourself for the longevity, the salary expectations that you want, but do that through credentials, through experience, and align your skill sets and what you're paying for competencies to the salary expectation of the career field you're looking to go into.
During your adventure of life, you started way back when as in manned aviation, transitioning to some drone usage, and then obviously into instruction and training. Can you kind of give us some insights from your experiences and what challenges you faced as you went from that transition, manned to unmanned to training, things like that? What challenges did you have?
The biggest, I think, learning aspect or the biggest turning point for me in my career was I was fresh out of aviation grade training. I was an A&P mechanic, and I fell into a drone job. So it was kind of like one of those things where I had fully intended to go be a corporate pilot. And it was in an economic downturn, and the aviation industry can be very cyclic. And so it was in a downturn. Nobody was hiring pilots, and for that matter, mechanics. And so I found this drone job, and it was flying and fixing aircraft for Textron. Textron Systems had a platform called Aeroson. And so I was in one of their very first training classes, and that training class consisted of a mix mash of every type of learner you could have out there. It was both Marine aviators, it was Air Force aviators, Army.
We know how tough those Marine aviators are.
But there were Army aviators. No offense, Matt, and they just had a very eclectic. They had computer science majors. They had just a very wide variety of individuals in this class to go through drone training. And that was the very first time I looked around the room, and I was one of the test cases. I was a college student in the class. So I was a recently graduated college student, aviator. There was another gentleman. They basically had 2 people from each of these categories. And you go through that training and you realize pretty quickly, like, some individuals in the room struggled to find the file menu. Some individuals in the room were so up into the engineering of how the aircraft was built, they had a hard time operating. It was like you had this mixed profile of individuals that had different competencies, different skill sets. You had F-16 pilots in the room that had 15,000 hours on platforms, and they struggled to operate a drone technology. That was the very first kind of illumination light bulb for me, saying you can be an aviator and this can be a very difficult industry for you. And on the other side, you can be a brand new ab initio learner, and this could be an amazing opportunity. And so the first thing I realized is that it's about the credentials you hold that means the most to the employers on the other side of the line. Employers want to see competencies, they want to see experience in the employment channels. That's what they're paying for at the employment level, is experience and competencies that they can get behind and they can employ in their mission statement.
That's interesting. So you ran into a little bit of a complex setting where you had different learners at different skill sets, and you're trying to learn on your own, and you might have been a little bit ahead or behind in certain areas. But in the end, I'm assuming everyone graduated or at least completed the training.
No, so I guess that was the biggest story of the nail in the coffin there, so to speak, was not everybody successfully completed the training. And again, not bragging, but as a college student, fresh out of college, again, I was fresh off of learning and training in aviation. They ended up selecting me and this other college student to be instructors on behalf of the program out of all these people in the room. And why? It was because we had a propensity for learning, again, following checklist procedures, that was natural to an aviator that had just gone through a Part 141 flight school. And so from the perspective of what does it take to be in the emerging technology industry, it is a combination of skill sets that includes technology. It includes the ability to follow process and procedure, be very well organized, be able to document processes. So being able to structure policy procedure is part of the maintenance technician side of the equation. But it's a combination of skill sets and competencies that make a successful individual inside of the industry.
The last thing we really want to talk about is CEO of a impactful company in a technology industry. How do you balance your work with your life and kind of what goes on in Josh Old's house when you're not running a company? How do you balance those things and keep yourself sane with all that's going on in this industry?
Perseverance. It's one of those terms that I again never expected to be running a company when I came up through operations. Again, I had a unique background. I grew up on a horse ranch in northern Michigan. So for me, being in aviation was thrilling because it was kind of a new career space that I'd grown up not even knowing what it was. So when you get into the throes of life, and to your point, you get married, you have kids. I've got 3 of them now. They're all young. It's an important balancing act to make sure that you have a balance between life and what's happening at work. And it's perseverance. It's understand that it is going to be challenging. It is going to be difficult. We've been through very difficult years in the drone industry. It's been a very slow moving industry. I know there's a lot in the industry that can agree with that, but the key is perseverance. It's loving what you do when you come to work every day. It's having a passion for the kind of work you do. I love what we do at USI. I love the workforce side of connecting the dots between opportunity and really cool career fields that people can get excited about every day. And so it's keeping your eye on the ball, which the ball is the mission, and making sure that mission is front and center, and understanding that, again, USI is very tied into servant leadership. It's about leading in the space, but understanding that you're supporting a broader mission and persevering through tough times, because they're going to come, and it's understanding that there's light at the end of the tunnel, whether you see it or not.
Yeah, and I'm sure having those littles and a supportive family structure helps you through those lean times as well. That knowing that they're there and ready to support. So thank you, Josh. I appreciate it. It was a great conversation. I think everyone that's watching enjoyed the fact that there is a personal side to Josh Olds, the CEO of USI. And I think everyone will be excited to look you up and hopefully partner with USI in the future. So thanks again for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for watching. Our hope over the series is to engage drone industry leaders like Josh Olds in thoughtful conversations like we had today. If you have topics or questions you might find interesting, please send them to the team. Finally, I would like to thank Josh for not just joining us, but sponsoring our program. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you all very soon on the Unmanned Podcast.